Hey everyone! This is a quick reminder to subscribe and hit that like button. It lets me know that you are enjoying my content. Also, feel free to drop your suggestions for future stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and let's dive right in. The old museum air hung thick and heavy, a blend of dust and forgotten things. For me, it was more than just the air. It was the weight of a legacy I'd spent most of my life trying to understand. My grandmother Eliza had been a curator here, a woman I barely remembered, a whisper of a memory, yet her presence permeated these halls like the scent of old parchment. She died when I was young, a sudden, unexplained illness that had left a gaping hole in our family. My mother, always a practical woman, had dismissed Eliza's passion for the museum as an eccentric hobby, a distraction from real life. But I felt a connection to this place, a pull I couldn't explain. Growing up, I'd often visit the museum, drawn to its hushed silence and the stories whispered from behind glass cases. I'd wander the halls, imagining my grandmother walking beside me, pointing out her favorite exhibits, sharing her vast knowledge. I'd even sneak into her old office, a dusty room filled with stacks of research notes and strange artifacts. My mother always warned me to stay away from that room, saying it was full of old ghosts. But I couldn't resist the feeling that Eliza was trying to tell me something, that the answers to the questions surrounding her death lay hidden within those walls. After college, I drifted for a while, unsure of what I wanted to do with my life. I'd studied art history, hoping to follow in my grandmother's footsteps, but the practicalities of life, the need to pay rent and bills, pushed me in other directions. I worked odd jobs, never feeling truly fulfilled, always haunted by the feeling that I was meant for something more. Then, I saw the ad, Night Guard Wanted, Local Historical Museum. It was a part-time position, the pay was barely minimum wage, but something about it resonated with me. It was a chance to be closer to my grandmother's world, to walk the same halls she had walked, to perhaps finally uncover the secrets she had left behind. And honestly, I needed the money. My last attempt at a real career as a freelance graphic designer had crashed and burned spectacularly. Old Man Hemlock, the retiring guard, handed me a list of rules, his eyes wide with a fear I'd initially dismissed. It wasn't just the usual, lock up, set the alarm stuff. This was different. Don't look at the statues for too long, he'd rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Especially the general in the Civil War exhibit. They say his eyes, they follow you. He'd paused, swallowing hard. And never, never check Exhibit 17 after midnight. Some things are best left undisturbed. He'd added, almost as an afterthought, and listen to the whispers, they'll tell you what the museum wants. I'd raised an eyebrow at that, but Hemlock just gave me a look that made my blood run cold. Oh, and, he'd continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, don't touch the antique dolls. Their eyes, they're not just painted on. I chuckled, trying to project an air of confidence I didn't feel, but the chill in Hemlock's voice lingered, echoing the unease I already felt. This place, it felt like it was waiting for something. The first few hours were uneventful, just the creaks and groans of an old building settling. I patrolled the silent galleries, the only sound my own footsteps echoing off the marble floors. I glanced at the dinosaur skeleton looming in the central hall, a relic of a world long gone, and wondered what secrets this museum held. My grandmother had always said museums were more than just repositories of artifacts. They were gateways. Gateways to the past, to stories, to something else. Then, the whispers started. Faint at first, like rustling silk. They seemed to emanate from the wax figures in the Victorian display. I dismissed it as my imagination, the product of a long, lonely night. But then I noticed the smallest wax child, a little girl in a frilly dress. Her painted eyes, usually dull and lifeless, seemed to follow me as I moved. A shiver ran down my spine. It was a child remarkably like the one in the old photo my grandmother kept on her desk. A photo I'd stared at countless times as a child, wondering about the grandmother I never truly knew. The wax child's eyes, they held the same unsettling stillness, and she was holding a doll. An antique doll with eyes that seemed to glitter in the dim light. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a wax figure. But then, I swore I saw the figure's head tilt. Just a fraction of an inch maybe, but enough to make my heart pound in my chest. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the child. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a cold wind. I could almost make out words, but they were distorted, unintelligible. A prickling sensation crawled across my skin. I had the distinct feeling I wasn't alone. I tried to shake it off. It's just the atmosphere, I told myself. An old building, late at night, it's getting to you. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. The whispers, the child's eyes, the feeling of being watched. It was all starting to unsettle me. I glanced back at the Victorian display. The wax child was still there, its painted smile now seeming wider. And in the shadows behind it, I thought I saw something move. Something tall and indistinct, like a figure shifting in the darkness. I didn't stick around to find out. I turned and walked quickly away, the whispers chasing me down the long, echoing hallway. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this night was going to be anything but ordinary, and a small, nagging voice whispered in the back of my mind, "Grandmother, what did you get me into?" My heart hammered against my ribs as I practically ran down the hallway, the whispers nipping at my heels. I didn't dare look back. I just needed to get away from that Victorian display, away from those unsettling wax eyes. I found myself in the Civil War exhibit, the air thick with the smell of old leather and the faint metallic tang of something else. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the unsettling atmosphere was playing tricks on my senses. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, terribly wrong. I paused, trying to catch my breath, my gaze falling on the life-size statue of the Civil War general. He stood there, stern and imposing, his bronze face weathered and grim. Hemlock's warning echoed in my mind, "Don't look at the statues for too long. Especially the general. They say his eyes, they follow you." I knew I should look away, that I should just move on. But curiosity, that insidious human trait, held me captive. It was more than just curiosity, though. It was a feeling, a sense that I was being drawn to him, that he held some kind of answer. An answer to what, I didn't know, but the pull was undeniable. "Just a quick look," I muttered to myself, trying to rationalize my foolishness. I stared at the general, taking in the details of his uniform, the intricate buttons, the gleaming sword at his side. His face was rigid, his expression unreadable. But then, something shifted. His painted eyes, usually dull and lifeless, seemed to focus on me. A wave of dizziness washed over me, a sudden rush of cold that made me shiver despite the summer heat. I blinked, trying to clear my head, but the feeling persisted. His gaze, it was like he was looking right through me, seeing something I couldn't see myself. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched intensifying tenfold. It wasn't just the general's eyes, it was his entire presence. He seemed to radiate a cold, malevolent energy. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were louder now, swirling around me like a vortex, and I could almost make out words. My name. They were whispering my name. I tore my gaze away from the general, finally succumbing to the growing dread. I had to get out of there. I turned and practically ran from the exhibit, my footsteps echoing through the silent halls. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I knew that if I did, I would see him. I knew that his eyes would be following me, burning into my soul. I stumbled into the main hall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The dinosaur skeleton seemed to loom over me, its bony grin mocking my fear. I glanced around, trying to get my bearings. The museum seemed different somehow, the layout subtly altered. Or was it just my imagination? Was the fear playing tricks on my mind? I leaned against a nearby display case, trying to calm my racing heart. I told myself it was just nerves, that I was letting Hemlock's warnings get to me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Something was happening in this museum. Something dark and unsettling. And I had a feeling that I was right in the middle of it. The whispers continued, now a constant hum in the background, and I knew with a chilling certainty that the general's gaze was still on me, even though I couldn't see him. He was watching, waiting, and I had the distinct feeling that he wasn't the only one. The chill that had gripped me in the Civil War exhibit clung to me like a shroud. I shivered, despite the warmth of the summer night, and rubbed my arms, trying to chase away the lingering dread. I knew I should probably call it a night, go home, and pretend this whole thing was just a figment of my overactive imagination. But something held me back. A feeling. deep in my gut, that I couldn't just leave. It was like my grandmother was whispering in my ear, urging me to stay, to uncover the secrets hidden within these walls. And then there was Exhibit 17. Hemlock's warning echoed in my mind. Some things are best left undisturbed. Of course, that only fueled my curiosity. It was like a forbidden fruit, tempting me with its mystery. I told myself it was just an old wives' tale, a story Hemlock used to scare new guards. But the look in his eyes, the genuine fear that had etched itself onto his face, told me otherwise. I glanced at my watch, 11:58 p.m. Almost midnight. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it was a bad idea. But the pull was too strong to resist. It was like something was drawing me towards it, a dark, irresistible force. I told myself I would just take a quick peek, that I wouldn't touch anything, just a glimpse, and then I'd leave. Midnight chimed, the sound echoing through the silent museum like a death knell. Each toll resonated deep within me, sending shivers down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the flashlight in my pocket. Then, I took a deep breath and started walking. Exhibit 17 was tucked away in a darkened corner of the museum, almost hidden from view. It was draped in a heavy black cloth, as if it were something to be ashamed of, something to be concealed from the light. The air around it felt different, colder, heavier. It was like the very air was holding its breath. I reached out and hesitantly pulled the cloth away. My breath caught in my throat. Beneath the cloth sat a grotesque idol, carved from a dark, unidentifiable stone. Its surface was covered in disturbing symbols, strange and unsettling. They looked ancient, older than anything I'd ever seen. They seemed to writhe and twist before my eyes like living things. The idol itself was repulsive. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were distorted, exaggerated. Its face was a mask of cruelty. With sharp, pointed teeth and eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. It was smaller than I expected, only about a foot tall, but it radiated an aura of power, of malevolent energy. As I stared at it, mesmerized by its ugliness, I saw something move beneath the idol's draping. A long, pale hand with unnervingly long fingers twitched. Just a slight movement, barely perceptible, but enough to make my heart leap into my throat. I stumbled back, my flashlight falling to the floor with a clatter. The sound echoed through the silence, seeming to amplify the stillness that followed. I didn't wait to see anything else. I turned and ran, my footsteps pounding against the marble floor. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just wanted to get away from that thing, away from the feeling that it was watching me, that it knew I had seen it. I burst out of the exhibit, gasping for air, my mind reeling. What had I seen? What was that thing? And more importantly, what did it want? I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I had made a terrible mistake. I had broken the rules, and now, I was going to pay the price. My lungs burned and my heart hammered against my ribs as I stumbled back into the main hall. I leaned against a marble column, trying to catch my breath, my eyes darting around the room, half expecting to see something. I didn't know what. The general, the wax child, the grotesque figure from Exhibit 17. My mind raced, replaying the image of that pale hand twitching beneath the idol's draping. It couldn't have been my imagination. I saw it. The silence of the museum, which had been unsettling before, was now terrifying. It was a silence pregnant with anticipation, a silence that felt like it was listening, waiting. And then, it shattered. A low groan echoed through the hall, vibrating through the floor and into my bones. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a deep, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. I looked up, my eyes scanning the room, trying to pinpoint the source. And then I saw it, the dinosaur skeleton, which had been looming harmlessly in the center of the hall just moments before, was now different. Its bony head was tilted slightly, its empty eye socket seeming to fix on me. And as I watched, one of its massive legs shifted, just a fraction of an inch, but enough to make me gasp. It was alive. Panic clawed at me, a primal fear that threatened to overwhelm me. I knew I had to get out of there, but my legs felt like lead. I tried to move, but I was frozen in place, my eyes transfixed on the dinosaur. And then the whispers started again, louder this time, more distinct. They swirled around me, a cacophony of voices that spoke in a language I didn't understand, but the intent was clear. They were taunting me. Suddenly a crash from the other side of the hall made me jump. I whirled around, my flashlight beam dancing across the exhibits. And then I saw him. The general. He was no longer in his exhibit. He stood in the middle of the hallway, his bronze face contorted in a snarl. His painted eyes, which had seemed to follow me before, now burned with a malevolent light. He raised his sword, the polished metal glinting in the dim light. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The museum was no longer silent, it was alive. The statues were moving, their expressions shifting, their eyes fixed on me. The whispers were now a roar, a chorus of voices that filled the air with dread. And from the Victorian display, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A giggle, a high-pitched, childish giggle that sent shivers down my spine. I turned to run, but the general blocked my path. He advanced towards me, his movements slow and deliberate, his sword raised high. I screamed, a sound that was swallowed by the roar of the whispers. I knew I was trapped. The museum had awakened. As the general lunged, his sword whistling through the air, I ducked and scrambled past him. I didn't stop to see if he was following. I just ran. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, the roar of the whispers echoing behind me, urging the statues on. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the general wasn't far behind, his bronze face a mask of fury. And behind him, the wax figures were shuffling and lurching, their painted smiles now grotesque grins. The little wax girl, the one with the doll, was right at the front, her eyes gleaming with a malicious glee. The museum's layout seemed to have shifted again. The hallways twisted and turned, leading me in circles. I recognized some exhibits, the Egyptian mummies, the display of ancient weapons, but they were arranged differently, in a way I didn't remember. It was like the museum itself was playing with me, trapping me in its labyrinthine embrace. I felt a surge of panic. I was lost. I stumbled into a room filled with antique furniture. A grand four-poster bed stood in the center, draped in velvet curtains. It looked like a haven, a place to hide. But I knew better. There was no safety in this museum anymore. Nowhere to hide. As I hesitated, the door creaked open behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight beam shaking. It was the wax child. She stood in the doorway, her doll clutched in her waxy hand. Her painted smile was wider than ever, and her eyes, they were no longer just painted. They gleamed with a cold, intelligent light. She giggled, a sound that scraped against my nerves. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. The child took a step closer, then another. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I could see the faint lines where her limbs were joined, the cracks in her waxy skin. She was terrifying. I turned and ran again, desperate to escape. I burst out of the room and into a long, dark hallway. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. I could hear the wax child's giggles behind me, growing closer, and the general... I could hear the heavy thud of his footsteps, the scrape of his sword against the floor. They were hunting me. I reached the end of the hallway and found myself in a large, open gallery. In the center of the room, bathed in an eerie light, was Exhibit 17. The black cloth was gone, and the grotesque idol sat on its pedestal, pulsing with a dark energy. The whispers were now a deafening roar, and I could feel the eyes of the statues on me, watching, waiting. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to keep moving. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The walls of the gallery were closing in, the space shrinking. The museum was trapping me. It wanted me. I was trapped, a lone prey animal in a museum-turned-hunting ground. The whispers were now a chorus, chanting my name. They were coming for me. The walls were closing in, the gallery shrinking, and I felt a wave of claustrophobia wash over me. I was trapped, cornered. The general was approaching from one side, his sword raised, and the wax child was shuffling towards me from the other, her doll clutched tightly in her waxy hand. The whispers were deafening, a cacophony of voices chanting my name. I knew I had to do something, anything. I stumbled back, my eyes fixed on the grotesque idol in the center of the room. Exhibit 17. It was the source of all this horror, the epicenter of the museum's awakening. I had a feeling that if I could understand it, if I could understand its power, I might have a chance to survive. Driven by a desperate hope, I lunged towards the idol. I had to get closer. I had to see it, to understand it. As I moved, I felt a strange pull, a sense of connection to the idol, as if it was calling to me. The whispers intensified, and I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. I stumbled, nearly falling, but I managed to reach the pedestal. I stared at the idol, my mind racing. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to writhe and twist before my eyes, forming patterns that I vaguely recognized. They were ancient, older than anything I had ever seen. And then I remembered my grandmother's research notes. She had studied these symbols, these rituals. She had written about the idol, its power, its demands. I frantically searched my memory, trying to recall what she had written. The idol, it demanded a sacrifice, a human sacrifice. And tonight, I was the intended victim. The museum was alive because of the idol, because of the rituals performed within its walls. The statues, the wax figures, they were all vessels for something far more sinister, something ancient and evil. A wave of nausea washed over me. I understood now. This wasn't just a haunted museum. It was a place of dark rituals, a place where ancient evils were kept alive. And my grandmother, had she known? Had she discovered the truth? Was that why she had died? The general was almost upon me, his sword raised high. The wax child was giggling, her waxy hand reaching out to grab me. I knew I had to act fast. I had to break the cycle. I had to stop the ritual. Remembering my grandmother's frantic scrawls in her notes, I realized what I had to do. The idol needed to be destroyed. It was the only way. But how? What could I possibly do to destroy something so powerful, something that had been worshipped for centuries? As the general lunged, I ducked again and grabbed the idol from its pedestal. It was heavier than I expected, cold and smooth to the touch. I held it tightly, feeling its dark energy pulsing through me. And then I ran. I ran towards the nearest wall, ignoring the general's roar and the wax child's shrieks. I had to take the chance. I slammed the idol against the wall with all my might. The impact reverberated through the museum, a jarring crash that momentarily silenced the whispers. The idol, my grandmother's obsession, the source of the museum's dark power, shattered against the stone wall. Fragments of the dark stones scattered across the floor like fallen stars from a nightmare sky. For a moment, everything was still. The general froze, his sword half raised. The wax child's giggle died in her throat. Even the whispers seemed to hold their breath. Then, the museum shook. Not a gentle tremor, but a violent convulsion, as if the very foundations of the building were groaning in protest. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and exhibits rattled in their cases. The statues swayed, their expressions contorted in rage. The wax figures seemed to melt slightly, their forms becoming indistinct, grotesque. The air crackled with an energy I could feel on my skin, raising the hairs on my arms. I stumbled back, my eyes fixed on the shattered idol. Had I done it? Had I broken the cycle, the ritual that had kept this museum alive for centuries? Or had I just unleashed something far worse? The general roared, a sound that echoed through the shaking museum. He charged towards me, his bronze face twisted in a mask of pure fury. The wax child shrieked, her waxy limbs flailing as she lunged. The other statues followed, their movements jerky and unnatural, their eyes burning with malevolent intent. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to escape. But as I turned to run, I saw that the museum was changing again. The hallways were shifting, twisting, becoming a labyrinth of impossible angles. Doors that had been there moments before were gone, replaced by blank walls. The museum was fighting back, trapping me, refusing to let me go. I ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The general was close behind, his heavy footsteps shaking the floor. The wax figures were closing in from all sides, their whispers now a chorus of hate. I could hear my grandmother's voice in the whispers, a faint echo of warning, a plea. Run, Haley, run. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran, driven by pure instinct, by the primal need to survive. I stumbled through darkened galleries, past silent exhibits, the whispers chasing me like a pack of hungry wolves. I could feel the presence of the museum, a dark, malevolent force that was trying to consume me. And then I found myself in the main hall, standing beneath the dinosaur skeleton. It was still there, its bony head tilted slightly, its empty eye socket seeming to follow me. But it wasn't moving. It was just a skeleton, a relic of a long-dead world. The general appeared at the other end of the hall, blocking my path. The wax figures surrounded me, their waxy hands reaching out. I was trapped. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But then, something happened. The shaking stopped, the whispers faded, the silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence. It was a silence that felt empty. I opened my eyes. The general was gone. The wax figures were still, their expressions frozen. The museum was quiet, still. The malevolent presence I had felt moments before was gone, replaced by an unsettling emptiness. I looked around, my heart still pounding in my chest. The museum was back to normal, the hallways no longer shifting. Everything was as it should be, but something was different. Something had changed. I walked over to where the idol had been, the shattered fragments scattered on the floor. I picked up a piece of the dark stone, turning it over in my hand. It was cold, smooth, and strangely heavy. The journal I had found, my grandmother's research, had mentioned the idol's destruction would have consequences. Had I truly destroyed it? Or had I merely broken it, weakened it, unleashed something even more terrible? I didn't know. I looked around the silent museum, the weight of my grandmother's legacy pressing down on me. Had I broken the cycle, the ritual that had haunted this place for so long? Or had I simply postponed it, become part of it? Perhaps one of the newly acquired wax figures, a figure with Haley's eyes and a look of frozen terror on its face? The whispers in the museum continue, carrying with them the faint echo of my grandmother's voice, a warning that lingers even in silence. I knew one thing for certain: I would never look at this museum or its secrets the same way again.